All right. So let's go ahead and also talk about the ethicality of children soldiers. All right. So, throughout the United States, end up asking, how can mass shootings be stopped? You know, ultimately, how do we find a solution to this problem? Well, there is solutions that have been, applied globally. All right. Now, who is the most successful in that aspect? If I remember correctly, Sweden. Wait, it's either Sweden or Finland. All right. But you're asking, what did they do to go ahead and reduce the amount of damage from mass shootings? Forced military service before teenage years. Actual teaching of the amount of damage and devastation that firearms could do, as well as the, irresponsible discharge of a firearm, as well as the dangers that could be accrued by the mis misperception of what type of firearm. All right, because understand, when you have kids getting shot because they had a water gun in their hand and law enforcement told them to drop their weapon, while simultaneously not giving them enough time to respond to say it's a water gun. The problem is that itchy trigger finger officer. All right. But what have been the benefits of that? Well, for example, their president was able to go ahead and actively, engage with the public, not need security clearance. Ultimately, the entire community and, the festival ended up being, their security clearance basically and their security team, you know, but they're even able to actively, open carry and no accidental or very few accidental discharge situations because of understanding the cataclysmic devastation that that firearm can go ahead and release. All right. And understand it's not like Microsoft Paint. All right. It's not like Photoshop. You can't just edit, rewind, edit, all that and everything. No. When you pull that trigger, whatever it is on the other end of that trigger, understand you need to evaluate the factor that it's your life or its life, your life or theirs. And ultimately, you need to understand the impact and ramification of everything that comes along with if the time comes that you end up having to make the decision of pulling that hammer back and pulling the trigger, that ultimately you pull that trigger, you understand there are consequences that come with it. Whether the consequences is the person surviving or the person dying, and the legal implications that come along with the fact that you were willing to pull that trigger, that's another conversation within itself. Whether or not you're a good person or a bad person because of your capability of being able to pull that trigger because of understanding the gravity of the situation that it ends up taking to make you forget what your moral fiber says and to actively pull that trigger, understanding that whatever it is at the other end of that barrel, that if you didn't pull that trigger, there's a chance that it would not have stopped trying to charge at you. All right. And don't think for a second that when it comes to a battlefield, that children, as far as, being in that, combat zone, that it's unjustifiable loss of life. Because understand, when you end up going ahead and clarifying that that loss of life wasn't justified, while simultaneously not clarifying about their wardrobe choices, you know, and wondering when it should ever be in season for a child to go ahead and wear a vest with explosives, that type of situation. then it's not about the ethicality of killing the kid. It's about the amount of damage that that kid could do should he end up going ahead and getting blown up like a Molotov cocktail, being able to settle fallout zone, large enough to be able to kill everybody that was trying to decide whether being a spectator or whether, their threat analysis was enough, but not wanting to have to be the one to explain the loss of life. Because child killer, baby killer, automatically the great evil, while simultaneously not wanting to ask, hey, that kid coming at you with the suicide bomber vest, you let him get close enough, is going to take everybody in the general vicinity out. Is this enough of a reason to pull that trigger? And ultimately, nobody wanting to have to be responsible for that certified kill or that, you know what I mean? So, ultimately understand there are certain aspects that end up getting glorified about having to make the tough calls, while simultaneously, until you've had to make some tough calls, you don't understand the gravity that comes along with having to make those fucking calls. Because unless you've ever had somebody else's survival depend on your capability to endure, the ability to understand the capacity of decisions being made, what you don't understand is in a fight or flight situation, the one thing that you don't get the luxury of, that everybody engaging in the attempt of a good faith debate actually does end up having, is time to debate about the details. Do you know who doesn't have the time to debate about the details? The people that have actively been collateral damage, So ultimately, the point that I am making, everybody has their own fight, everybody has their own war, everybody has their own cause, everybody has their own personal call to action, everybody has their own personal call to peace. Ultimately, what you are willing to sacrifice along the way, give up, and what those sacrifices ended up meaning are not going to translate evenly amongst everybody. But unless you've never had to go ahead and look at the finger tracings in the middle of your ankles, because of the factor that you remember how hard you had to go ahead and grab them motherfuckers while kissing your ass. Kissing your own fucking ass because of thinking it was goodbye. Having to explain that feeling for anybody that's never had a life or death experience, that does not understand, hey, life or death experience, that right there, that's not something that everybody endures and lives to tell the tale. All right? A near-death experience or a life or death experience, understand, it just means that you were on the lucky side of the coin toss. You made it out alive. But it doesn't mean that you made it back the same condition that you ended up going in the first place. And that's the same thing that you can go ahead and compare when it comes to trauma. When you start it, from where the trauma started, and from where things progress to, and where you're at in the process of trying to heal up from that trauma, they're not going to peacefully coincide in order, and it is a brutal, disorganized fucking mess with a whole bunch of people wanting to hide their hands in the hand that they had in the situation.